Welcome to Ekenäs, part of the town of Raseborg since 2009. This guided tour consists of 4 parts: Ekenäs past and present, Ramsholmen, Ekenäs attractions, and Helen Kärrbäck in Ekenäs. This tour has been funded by Västnyländska Kultursamfundet as an EU project. Ekenäs past and present. On the 1st of January 2009, the 28,000 inhabitants of Ekenäs, Kaaris and Puoju were brought together to form the collective town of Raseborg, although each was to maintain its identity and original name. The foundation of Ekenäs is formally placed in the year 1528, when a new castle was to be built to replace that of Raseborg, which was falling into disrepair. No more than the foundations were ever built, though these can be seen to this day at Slottsbacken. Ekenäs did not receive its town charter until it was granted by Gustavus Vasa in 1546. The thought behind this action was to create a trading centre to compete with Reval, now known as Tallinn. His patience was short-lived, however, and in 1550 he founded Helsinki at the mouth of the river Vanda, forcibly populating the new town with, among others, Ekenäs residents, so it might grow more rapidly. When his son John became Duke of Finland in 1556, the people from Ekenäs were allowed to return home. Ekenäs was later placed in the hands of the Counts Leonhuvud, who levied taxes in the area for over 100 years, founded the first school, and built the stone Baroque church, which stood finished in 1680. During the 17th century, people largely lived from agriculture, fishing and trade. Exports included salted and dried fish, furs, cattle, hops, tar and timber. Imports were salt, spices, grain and general cargo. In the 1630s, the town lost its right to foreign trade, a right which was not returned until over 100 years later. The Folkskollärerinneseminariet, or the Ladies' Teacher Training College of 1871, and the Hange-Hyvinge Railway, completed in 1873, brought more life to the town, which had been leading a somewhat diminished existence following the Great Fire of 1821. At Kjellviken lies Dagmarkällan, named after the Danish-born Princess Dagmar, Tsarina Maria Fyodorovna, who often visited the place with her consort Tsar Alexander III at the end of the 19th century. A quayside and beach can also be found at Kjellviken. Ekenäs Brewery, later known as Hultmans Brewery, began production in 1858 and continued for over 100 years. Its prize-winning porter could be bought, for example, in Turku, Helsinki, Tampere and Viborg. From a newspaper article in Åby Underrättelser of 1874, we are led to understand that the old brewery's products are of an outstanding goodness and will enhance the factory's old reputation. When amalgamated with Kaaris and Puoju, Ekenäs had about 14,700 inhabitants, of which 82.2% were Swedish-speaking, thus making Ekenäs one of the country's most Swedish-speaking towns. It offers enormous cultural opportunities, arranging plays and concerts which draw an audience from across the country. Every part of Ekenäs has its own charm. In Kungsgatan, the country's first pedestrianized street, you can wander at leisure, soaking up the atmosphere from the many small shops. Ramsholmen. The coastline of Ekenäs is 1,500 kilometers and offers countless opportunities for open-air activities and recreation. A trip to Ramsholmen in spring, coinciding with the flowering of the wood anemones, has become a tradition for Ekenäs folk and visitors alike. The 55-hectare Hagen-Ramsholmen-Högholmen Woodland Park is the largest outdoor recreational area in Ekenäs and boasts an exceptionally rich flora and fauna, all but unequalled in other parts of the country. In terms of its biotope, Ekenäs is part of the Central European broad-leaved woodland, and the woods of Ramsholmen and Hagen are among the grandest and most luxuriant to be found anywhere in southern Finland. Typical of this type of woodland is the way its appearance changes with the seasons. Spring is a beautiful time with many rapidly blooming species, such as white and yellow wood anemones, corydalus, celandines, spring bulbs, and lily of the valley. As the leaves on the trees open, the wood becomes more shadowy and the spring flowers are replaced with great stands of ferns and brackens, shy-flowering plants and grasses. Autumn is a riot of color, and the microorganisms of the woodland floor start changing the great masses of fallen leaves into a rich mulch. In winter, the dark trunks of the trees contrast beautifully with the sky. Neighboring bays and wetlands and the dense scrub lining the beaches provide important nest sites for many species. Numerous paths invite walkers, joggers and cyclists. Hagen, Ramsholmen, Gåsören and Högholmen are all protected areas. Rules for their use may be found on notice boards. Ekenäs attractions. Ekenäs church at the very centre of town is the only Baroque grey stone church in Finland. Building started in 1653 and the church was completed 27 years later. It was badly damaged by the fire in 1821 when 13 surrounding properties were destroyed. As a result of the rebuilding, the church gained a completely different appearance in a neoclassical style. Ekenäs Old Town, Gamlastan, boasts many well-preserved timber buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries. The oldest part is built according to a medieval town plan, which is very unusual in Finland. The same can be said of the preservation of the town's sea gates. Many of the street names in Old Town bear the names of the trades which used to flourish there. Linen Weaver's Street, Hatmaker's Street, and Painter's Street are examples. This part of the town still retains a square complete with stocks where local criminals formerly received their punishments. Slottsbacken may also be considered part of the old town, with its well-preserved wooden buildings, but is more strenuous to visit owing to the many flights of steps and steep inclines. Here you can find a number of well-preserved empire-style buildings and a wooden fire tower, now a private house. Down by the beach stood the old stables from which today's Stallersparken, or the stable park, takes its name. The salt storage houses and the Knipan summer restaurant, built on stilts above the water, are also worth a visit. The original Knipan was built by Fredrik Borenius as part of a bathhouse construction in the 1860s. The building acquired its current form in 1908, fulfilling the drawings of Ekenäs-born architect Hjalmar Åberg. It is owned by the town of Raseborg and leased to a private company. Helene Kärrbäck in Ekenäs. Helena Sofia Kärrbäck was born in Helsinki in the summer of 1862. There she lived with her mother Olga, her father Svante, and her elder brother Magnus.
At the age of 4, I had an accident. I fell down the stairs and broke my left hip.
The accident left her with a permanent injury and diminished movement, and this is why she spent long periods at home as a child. Helene's mother provided her with paper and pens so she could draw everything she saw in the house.
My teacher, Lina Ingman, saw my drawings and showed them to Adolf von Becker, who liked them. That is how I was accepted into the drawing school of the Finnish Art Association at the age of 11. Later on, I was given the opportunity to travel in Europe and study in Paris.
Helene had roots in Ekenäs, both from her mother's and her father's side. Among others, her mother's aunt Ulrika Barman lived there. Her father was partly raised by his grandfather and his aunts in Ekenäs.
In the summer of 1890, I visited my brother Magnus when he was put in charge of the first restoration of the ruins of Raseborg Castle. I lived in the vicarage of Snappertuna, but also visited Ekenäs where I painted town views from Slottsbacken.
The first time Helene stayed in Ekenäs for a longer period was the summer of 1918. She painted a lot in Skepparträdgården together with her good friend Einar Reuter, who was also visiting Ekenäs that summer.
I painted the trees in the park and the brewery next to it. You can just see the houses behind the tennis court. I was photographed by Einar Reuter while I was sitting at my easel in the park. That was a happy occasion. I also painted a portrait of him called The Sailor.
She came back to Ekenäs to paint in the summers of 1919 and 1920. During the first summers in Ekenäs it was difficult to find a room to let, so Helene had to move several times. The longest periods she lived with Sigrid Nyberg at Fisktorget.
We became very good friends and she sat for me many times. I have also painted the little red cottage in her backyard.
1925, Helene left Hyvinkää, where she had lived with her mother for 23 years. She looked for peace and quiet and found Ekenäs to be a peaceful town. Eskil Bäckman let her a house at Perspektivet 2, which is Raseborgsvägen today.
Eskil Bäckman was a nice landlord who helped me with a lot of practical housework. He also put a bench in the bower by the door so I could sit there in peace and quiet without prying eyes from passers-by. Later he sat as a model several times so I could thoroughly study the lines in his face. I was particularly fond of the beautiful curve of his nose.
Many others who visited her also sat as models, and so did the caretaker's children. But often it was difficult to find models in Ekenäs. Those times Helene painted apples or other fruit from the autumn fair, which in Ekenäs dates back to the 17th century. When she could not find any other models, she painted self-portraits, which became increasingly more common in her later years.
During my years in Ekenäs, I also repainted a lot of old works I had done in my youth, among others the dancing shoes and the convalescent. At the age of 75, I learned a new technique and made a series of lithographies of the same motifs.
There are many stories about Helene Kärrbäck's life in Ekenäs. If you would like to acquaint yourselves with the places she lived at and motifs from the town, you can order a dramatized walk around Ekenäs with Anne Ingman, who also portrayed Helene in this guided tour. For more information, see mobiguide.fi.